I'm going to show you a tremendous game played in the battle for third and fourth place between world champion Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Let's hit 100k subs. Join me on the journey. Let's do this together. So here we go. Magnus Carlsen playing white here against Wesley So in the first game in the first set of this match for third and fourth place. I thought this was going to be the final, but no, there you go. It's the commentator's curse and they're playing for third and fourth place. But I've got to show you this game anyway. I know it's not for the main prize, but this is absolutely insane. Here, Carlsen starts to mess around. He played pawn to a4 from this absolutely standard 4 knights opening. Well, what's this a-pawn got to do with the price tea in China? Not a lot, I can tell you. This is a bit of a joke move, and it reminds me a bit of the game he played against Wesley online last year, where he played f3 against Wesley, and somehow Wesley couldn't take it seriously and was just rattled by it. And Magnus succeeded with a kind of weird bomb cloud. And okay, this isn't quite as nuts. I mean, I think you can say this move is just a bit useless. Basically, it's hands over the move to black. But it has been played by Magnus before in a blitz game, just for fun. And it's also been played by Lucas and Jordan van Forest. So there's a bit of history there. I mean, it's not a great move. But anyway, let's see what happens. Bishop b4. Good move. So it's as though black is playing with the white pieces. It's a classic 4 knights position, except that pawn is on a4. Bishop d3. Okay, so we're getting even wackier here. This is one of those positions where you're going to say, ladies and gentlemen, do not try this at home. Bishop d3 just looks so weird. You block in your d-pawn. Very strange. In fact, it's not that bad, as we'll see. Pawn to d6. Both sides castle. All looks pretty normal. Now, one way of making use of this bishop to d3 is to play rook to e1, supporting the pawn, and then dropping all the way back to f1 with this typical curl-up position. And that's not so bad. In fact, that is seen with colours reversed sometimes. And then you start to develop your queen side. So rook e1, bishop f1 would be normal. But Carlsen wants to make, let's say, use this bishop more actively on this diagonal. And, or even that diagonal. I'm misfiring already. So clearly after this exchange, this diagonal will open towards the king. Fair enough. So Wesley decides to decline that exchange. It's not just, well, let's have a look. There's a little trick involved actually, because after this you can see that this actually makes use of the pawn coming to a4, and that bishop is trapped. So it's not just about opening this one. There we go. So Wesley plays the bishop back to c5. Okay, that's fine. And c3. Once again, if this is exchanged, then white can trap that bishop. Wesley plays the pawn to a5. So absolutely not messing around, making sure that b4 isn't happening and giving the bishop a square to drop back to on a7. So it's kind of evened up in a sense. Magnus found a way to make use of a4 and Wesley has played a5. So kind of white hasn't lost any time really. Bishop to c2. Very good. So it almost looks like a Spanish position. You know, very often this bishop will travel around via b5 and a4 to c2. This time Magnus has done it in just 2 moves. It's got the bishop to c2, covers this e-pawn and also looks down this diagonal if this diagonal opens. Well, here maybe the most prudent move for black to play is the bishop back to a7, and after d4 bishop g5 is threatened to h6, and I think that's about even. But Wesley played pretty carelessly. Instead he exchanged knights. Pawn takes, so the knight is threatened, of course, by the pawn. This diagonal opens, and the knight came back to e7. Now, if pawn to d4, that can be taken, and it's not too bad. But Magnus went on the attack straight away. Knight g5, threatening the pawn on h7. Now, this is already a critical moment in the game. We're on move 11. And black has to play very carefully here. There's a threat to the pawn on h7. Well, you have a think. How would you defend against that threat? Would you play h6? Would you play g6? Would you play the bishop out to f5? Would you play that pawn to f5? Which of these moves would you make? Remember, it's a rapid play game. You don't want to spend too long. Wesley thought for 22 seconds in this position. Perhaps he should have invested a little more time. Okay, let's just take some of these moves. Well, what about g6? Well, the knight could perhaps spin round to e4. That might get a little bit tricky looking at these squares, and maybe d4. Who knows? There's f5. I don't like f5 because I think we could play d4, and there's potential for that knight to hop in on e6. Bishop f5 is reasonable. Probably very prudent to exchange off that light squared bishop. Although this looks a bit scary. In fact, white's knight would be driven back, and well, I think both sides are okay in that position. But it's tricky, and you know, with the knight on e4 and queen on h5 actively placed, it's still a bit tricky. Wesley played pawn to h6. Let's see what happened. First of all, d4, good move. So if the knight is taken, the bishop gets taken, and there'll be a bishop coming out here. Okay, not completely satisfactory for black. So the bishop came back to b6. Knight h7. Well, it would have been much nicer to have a queen on h7, supported by that bishop on c2. But let's see. It looks a bit odd at the moment. There is a point. First of all, the rook is attacked. The rook has to move to the side. And now, well, Magnus took precisely 2 seconds over this next move. Knight f6. Check. Forking king and rook. Therefore, the knight has to be taken. Queen h5. So Magnus is now a whole piece down, but he's got his queen in the danger zone, in the grill of black's king, and those bishops are just raking across the board. We love those. Absolutely superb. So, I mean, white just threatens to move the queen and take the pawn on h6. So Wesley plays e4, blocking out one of those bishops. Now, you don't want to take, because black will be able to play pawn to f5, and, well, it blocks out the bishop, but also gains time in blocking out that bishop as well. Instead, Carlsen played rook e1. Good move. He realises, of course, he's not going to be able to checkmate with just these pieces. He needs to bring all the boys into the game, so that rook is threatening to come up and swing across. And now the best move is bishop f5. It's still not completely clear, this position. I think white has a very dangerous attack, but black has chances to defend here. Still highly unclear. White is still a piece down, but very active pieces. But that didn't happen, folks. Let's rewind. So it's this position. Wesley plays what looks to me like a very natural move. Pawn to f5. But bishop takes h6. The move you would like to play is knight to g6. But then white has a very powerful follow-up. Bishop g5. The pawn can't come to f6 because of queen takes. And, well, once the queen moves, the bishop nestles in on f6, and that is too dangerous. So bishop h6 just played. Knight takes pawn. The bishop comes back to g5 anyway. This is really nice. If knight f6, then queen h4 is a deadly pin. Therefore f6. You can see the g6 square is now available for the queen. And here's the point. This bishop cuts back to this diagonal. We see this so often in the Spanish, that this light squared bishop is deadly on one diagonal, and even when that's blocked, it switches to the other diagonal. So it was looking good here, but that's blocked out and it comes back to this diagonal. c6 defends the knight. And here we go. We need to bring in the boys. The rook swings up the board, ready to come over. Now if pawn takes bishop, bishop takes knight, check, and the rook comes in, and that is absolutely deadly. There is no defense to one of these rook moves. So after rook e3, king f8, queen g6 anyway. The knight can't take the rook because of queen f7 mate. That bishop turns into a great helper. So the rook wants to come across to h3 and down here. Well, let's just show that more clearly. That's the threat, or one of the threats. f4 hits the rook, and now the rook cannot come to h3 because of the bishop. But now it's over. Check. Check. And here Wesley resigned, because if king e6, then rook takes pawn is checkmate. A lovely checkmate. Wow. 24 moves, that is, with that rook checkmate. Although I should say that's the final position was a move earlier. But so Magnus won so quickly. And I think once again we see that Wesley was upset by this really unorthodox move, pawn to a4. You know, it almost has the feeling that, well, surely I must be able to match that. Surely I won't lose after that. But, well, he showed that he was rattled, and that was the final position of the game. Now, this is only game one. I'm recording this while the match is still in progress. So we'll have to see what happens later. And, of course, I will be, reporting on the Giri Nepo match as well. See you later. Thank you.